great, amazing morning to you. Rise and shine up and at 'em. It's a phenomenal new day. You're officially tuned into Coffee and Conversation with Collette, and I'm Collette. And y'all know I do my curtsy. That's what I do to show reverence to you, because I know that you could be anywhere. And I know that trying to engage in your day, not even trying, doing, it's a willing, it's movement, action, that you are doing that. And a part of that dialogue is to make sure you see I have to flip my hair up. I know y'all just saw me the hour before and it was dark, and so now you see me, because that's what we do. We have to switch it up. That's what we do. so I know that you could be preparing for our conversation, and you know that our conversations are going to matter. But before I get into that, I want to do a quick housekeeping announcement, if you will. There's an exclusive premiere event, John Wins, Mirror Mirror. You can get your tickets now. It's going to be August the 20th at the AMC Forum 30. That's on Mound Road in Sterling Heights. And Mirror Mirror, you can get more information about it. The subtitle says, "You can't," what's it say now? "Unsee your truth." Nice. Very attractive, very interesting. It looks like it's suspenseful. Very excited about it, everyone. Go to www.johnwinsmirror.com. So it's John Wins with an S, Mirror Mirror. To get more information, that's compliments of our own Theo Broden, and you can follow up with that, because, you know, that's what we do. We support each other in all of our ventures and the like, so it is a pleasure to be able to introduce that to you before we engage in our conversation on today. So let me just tell you, I've been in Baltimore. Thank you all for reaching out to me. Thank you, everyone, for continued support of course, it's amazing station, WHPS TV 33, or if you're watching us on Comcast 90, or Roku, or Facebook Live, or Fire Stick, whatever, however you reach us, because, you know, that's what we do. We afford you various platform tools to be able to have conversations that matter, that we know on this station that will what? Educate, enlighten, and empower you. And so I've been in Baltimore. And I had the pleasure of being the campaign manager for a mayoral candidate there, Carmichael Stokey Kennedy. Everyone, great, amazing morning to you. Phenomenal team in Baltimore. And let me just tell you, if you ever thought and questioned what was going on in Detroit, and you thought you had it bad, and you thought that the conditions were just deplorable, and you ever wondered how you could figure it out, you need to go back east. You need to go back to Baltimore. But what I thought was so refreshing in the time that I was there is that no matter what the conditions and what the challenges of the conditions, is that there's such a resilient people. And so they're clusters, they're groups. So like we're connected, or we're separated by east side, west side, okay? So they all have east side, west side, but in that west side, it might be 20 different communities. That might literally, some might consist of 4 blocks. The Harlem West community consists of 72 blocks. So it's a variance of communities within that side of town, but they stick together. Can I say that again? That no matter what is going on, no matter what the challenges are, no matter how bad it looks, they stick together. And so I just believe, and I'm not just biased because he is my candidate, but I am under the notion, and I share with you all the time, that if you want to make this system work for you, the best way that you can make it work for you, specifically if you don't understand it, is to look at what people do and not what they say. Because so many times, and I always reference the book, and I presented it to us, what? We all know what I'm going to say. False Black Power, Jason Riley, Wall Street Journal, columnist and author. And the only group of people that gave their power away to the political process are black folk. I know you all saw in the news yesterday, they were acknowledging the Holocaust and all the, I forgot the umpteen years since this massive Holocaust, and what that looked like for Jewish folks coming up out of Europe, and the tragedies of that, and the loss of that, and the displacement of that, and the actual taking of lives of that, and some 500,000 people perished at the hands of Hitler and the ideology and the regime. And there's always a remembrance of that. It's always people holding on to what that history is and that legacy is, and not letting anyone forget what that is, and collectively working to keep it together. A lot of you might say, well, Collette, that's not really fair, because even though their lives were taken based on one man, those who were able to flee still were able to flee free, and they were able to come over to America and still by choice and have their talents and their skills and still their familiar structure intact and the like. And you're correct. You're correct in all of that, not taking away any of that, but still the premise is understanding the importance of collectiveness, understanding who we are historically together. And then you all will say, well, Collette, no, because we were separated when we came over here, and so we don't know about us being together. But I would implore you that for the simple fact that you could have that dialogue with me, for the simple fact that you could think through that statement to be able to articulate it, means that you know that there's an importance in it. Do you follow me? So we can all say all day long that, oh, we didn't grow up with this, and our structures were this, and all of that. And I agree with all of that. But at the end of the day, if you know what you didn't have, then at what point, what is the onus on you to recreate it? Sometimes our most family, the closest people that we have, family might not be blood related. I mean, I have to tell you, in the midst of everything and preparing and structuring and launching a campaign office and getting all of that together, just being in the community and getting a feel for the community was the best time I've had in such a long time. Just people being together. Like Friday night boxing with young people, going to be supportive. A kickball tournament for a charity. Like kickball, remember? Kickball? These are grown folk playing kickball to be able to raise money, to be able to give back. And there's an ownership and there's a commitment to the city. It's a commitment that no matter what, wherever I can go and what I can do on my own and all of those things, that I still choose us. I choose us to make us better. I choose us to be able to give my time and talents and expertise under what I understand this to be, to make it better for us. And so I want us to have that premise and that mindset as we enter and usher into our conversation today. Because there was this really interesting piece. I was coming off the Holocaust, and I said, well, you know what, maybe I should talk about that today. Maybe I should ask us, do we have a comparative narrative from the Holocaust and the American slave? And then I realized, no, Collette, because that's simple, right? That's dealing with a symptom and not an issue. And you know that we're better than that. We're bigger than that. And so then I thought about what this piece is, and the New York Times has a segment, and actually it's in its entirety is going to be introduced in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday, but it's a piece about democracy in America. And I thought it was just most interesting because the title is what captured me. And I wanted to share it with you because I really want you to think about it. And I thought that it was so appropriate. They entitled it the 1619 Project. Let me share that with you, okay? The New York Times Magazine, the 1619 Project. And that's what it looks like, okay? And the subtitle for this piece is, America wasn't a democracy until Black Americans made it one. Is that not profound to you? I had to let it sink in, and let me give it to you again. America wasn't a democracy until Black Americans made it one. And I'm going to read to you specifically because I believe that I cannot paraphrase this as an adequate overview for this amazing work. So I'm going to read it to you. Indulge me if you will. In August of 1619, a ship appeared on the horizon near Point Comfort, a coastal port in the British colony of Virginia. It carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold to the colonists. America was not yet America, but it was the moment it began. No aspect of the country would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. On the 400th anniversary of this fateful moment, it is finally time to tell America's story truthfully. The 1619 Project is a major initiative from the Times. Its goal is to reframe American history and to place the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are as a country. The project begins with essays in this week's issue of the magazine, each examining different aspects of contemporary American life from Wall Street to healthcare that have their roots in slavery and its aftermath. As Nicole Hannah-Jones writes in her essay, quote, "Without the idealistic, strenuous, and patriotic efforts of Black Americans, our democracy today would most likely look very different. It might not be democracy at all." And so I was moved by that. That America would not be a democracy if it weren't for Black folk. And as we enter into all these election cycles, as we proudly embrace this democratic oath, as we claim that we're Democrats, as we usher in our protest and our lobbying, all under the efforts of being a democracy, we have to really ask ourselves if we really are a democracy. Is it a great ideology that has never proven itself to be true, and maybe the mantra of that 10th percentile that gains all the wealth, that assumes all the profits, that owns all the properties, continuously dangles that carrot for us because we consistently chase after something that was given to us? And I just want you all to stay right there with me, because in the conversations that I've had over the last several days, I had to really give the group this ideology that the truth of the matter is, everything that we do was told and given to us. We are not functioning, the majority of us, under any original thought. So how we govern ourselves is given to us. So imagine that we're following the same rules and protocol that the oppressor created for our everyday interactions. We do the same things expecting a different result. We read the books and everything that they publish and say, oh, this is how politics should be. Oh, this is what a candidate should look like. Oh, this is what the pedigree is that a candidate should have. Oh, this is what the educational system should look like. Oh, this is what our employment spaces should look like. Oh, this is how we structure our families and what the 2.5 kids and the dog and the house should look like. Oh, who is creating those narratives for us that we follow to the T? And I'll give you religion. Who creates the dogma and the ideology of how we are supposed to reverence religion in our lives? Not spirituality, not a connection with the higher being, whether a God or Allah, not that, but religion and how it plays the role in who we are and how we govern ourselves and what we look at. We can look at the Vatican and say Catholicism and what that looks like and how it shapes the role of how people who follow the Pope and follow Catholicism and are Catholic and how they look at all the injustices or things that are happening. Or the business of the Pope and the Catholic Church in its ownership and monies and revenue across this world. And then its influence as they go in and talk to heads of state and the like. But we don't question that because we don't think that. Because we're not taught to think. And so I'm just asking us today, in this midst of looking at and assessing what democracy looks like, I want us to delve into that. I want to give you the definition of democracy. It is a noun. One, a system of governance by a whole population or an eligible or all the eligible members of state, typically through elected representatives. Some synonyms: representative, government, elective government, constitutional government, popular government, or control of an organization or group by a majority of its members. Democracy. America wouldn't be a democracy if it weren't for Black folk, slaves. We started the history of America and the ideology of the conversation that controls us today. But let me tell you what Benito Mussolini said. Democracy is talking itself to death. Let me get this again. Democracy is talking itself to death. The people do not know what they want. They do not know what is best for them. There is too much foolishness, too much lost motion. I have stopped the talk and the nonsense. I am a man of action. Democracy is beautiful in theory. In practice, it is a fallacy. You in America will see that someday. Benito Mussolini. Let me give that one more again. I want that to sink in before we go to the clip. And callers, I see you. Democracy is talking itself to death. Kind of notice that, huh? The people do not know what they want. They do not know what is the best for them. There is too much foolishness, too much lost motion. I have stopped the talk and the nonsense. I am a man of action. Democracy is beautiful in theory. In practice, it is a fallacy. You in America will see that someday. And you all know that Benito Amilcar Andrea Mussolini, who went by the name Deuce, the leader, was an Italian dictator who created the Fascist Party in 1919 and eventually held all the power in Italy as the country's prime minister from 1922 until 1943. And so are we living in this fallacy, this great ideology, this notion that democracy will sway itself? It is a living, breathing entity that will change the dynamics of how we live every day. But we don't honor those truths of how we got here. But the New York Times was brave enough to do a piece that honors the legacy, the 400 years of the establishment of these Americas that were on the backs of black folk, on the backs of African slaves. So how do we work into a space and really understand if the governance is meant for us if we don't honor what the history is? You see where I'm going? But there's some of us who might believe different. And if you don't understand what that looks like, let me go to a clip. Let us do that. And callers, I see you. Hold on for me for a second. I'm going to get to everybody. This starts our conversation as we usher in our Friday talk as well. But we're going to go to the history of the black vote and what it means for 2020. So if indeed we understand that America was established by African slaves, that there wouldn't be this notion of giving someone something better if it weren't for African slaves that were already separated, but the labor and the toil and the lives lost created the wealth that we have in America. If indeed we don't understand all that to be true and the system of governance was created to support those conceptually who are downtrodden, who are less than, who are disenfranchised, who are perceived to be based on all the things that were created by this controlling group, this is how we got here today. So maybe I need to show you what it looks like for us as we usher in this 2020 electorate and what our real role is if we understood what it is that we were up against, if we knew what we wanted, if we were clear to be able to hold ourselves accountable and then to be able to look at someone else realistically to see how they could meet our needs under governance. I know I'm going a lot of places this morning with you. I know it's a lot, but I want you just to soak it all in. I just pray that that is my prayer always when I open up this show prior to coming on to speak with you, that you have a mindset that receives this, because it's very different. I know that it's very different than what we're taught, but we're taught by folks who oppress us. So how could our mindsets ever be for freedom, a true freedom, an awakening, if everything that we were given and supposed to regurgitate was given by people who want to control? So in that vein, in my understanding of that, and as I share that with us today, let's take a look at the clip. MSNBC or NBC News did a clip, the history of the black vote.
In 2020, we think that at least 1 out of every 4 votes that are cast in the Democratic primaries for president are going to come from black voters. It's very possible that will be the highest number we've ever seen before. It's very possible we will look back at 2020 and say the black vote was never more important than in 2020. To put this in some context, we've put together here something I think is very interesting. Exit polls starting in 1976 from past Democratic presidential primaries. 1976 was basically the first year that media outlets like NBC began sponsoring these primary exit polls, whether it's the New York primary, the New Hampshire primary, the Florida primary. And so we have a record. That record, though, a lot of it has been buried. We have been able to resurface, we think, every primary since 1976 on the Democratic side where there has been a significant black vote in that primary and where an exit poll was conducted. We found it. We've put it all together here, and you get a look here at how the black vote has gone in each one of these competitive Democratic races. And a couple of things stand out. Number one is just there has been a slow but steady progression in that time, really, 40 plus years right now. You can point to two really kind of specific events. Number one came back in the 1980s. It was in the 1980s twice, in the 84 campaign and again in the 88 campaign, where Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, launched full-fledged national presidential campaigns in the Democratic primaries. And he said in 1984 that one of his goals in that campaign was to register millions of new black voters to get them voting in the Democratic primaries. And he did. You can see that in this data. And then you see it jump again about 20 years later. And that's when Barack Obama wins. When Barack Obama becomes president in 2008, and then through his presidency, you see this kind of sorting out of the two parties, white working class voters, blue collar white voters who had in the past maybe been Democrats. They've migrated more towards the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party, the role of black voters, the role of non-white voters in the Democratic Party increased from basically the moment that Obama became president there. So you can go back, you can look at any individual campaign. You can see Bill Clinton in 1992, Al Gore in 2000, John Kerry in 2004, Hillary Clinton in 2016. These are white candidates who appealed to black voters, made overwhelming support from black voters in the primaries a key part of their victory strategies. You can see Barack Obama, the first successful black presidential candidate who combined overwhelming support from black voters in 2008, basically about 80% support from black voters, with strong support from white voters, enough to win the Democratic nomination, enough to become ultimately president of the United States. So go take a look at the data. Go figure out what the story was in any one of these individual campaigns. I love looking at the old data. I love looking at old stories. I think they end up being so relevant to the present day. I think you will see the same thing. It is all there. As we head into 2020, I think you will see the story. There has been sort of that rising tide in the Democratic Party when it comes to the size, the clout, the power, the role of the black vote in Democratic presidential primaries. In 2020, it'll probably be more important than we have seen to date.
Did you understand that before it was shared? Did you understand the importance of our vote in America, period? Our push for democracy, period, and specifically as it pertains to this upcoming election. We're not invisible. This is not the invisible man, Ralph Ellison. This is not the spook that sat by the door, Samuel Greenlee. This is us, live and in color, reality, being able to take a hold of this perception of a democracy to really make it work for us. And so I guess that's my challenge for all of us, no matter where I find you and wherever we find ourselves, that we can always make lemonade out of lemons. But if you don't understand the system in which you've been put in, because all of us have been put in this. We've been put in the ideology of America. We've been put in what we are supposed to dream and aspire for and the like. We've been put in that space. We've been dropped in this. Since coming out of slavery, the only model that we had was that of the slave master. That we were supposed to work hard, get a good day's pay, earn a good wage. For those of us who could own, take care of our families, get our children a good education, and then we would propel from generation to generation. So I know you have some thoughts of that. And then W.B. Du Bois has some thoughts as well. We're going to go there, but I'm going to go to the lines first. Thanks for your patience. Great morning to you.
Oh, great morning to you. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday to you.
Very, very interesting, but look up the Devil's Punch Bowl in American concentration camp. So horrific, it was erased from history. I think we're still living in a bubble of illusions made by the 9% that controls the world. And the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor are the oppressed minds. And if we're not busy trying to take control of economics, politics, politics, structure,
Yes.
morals, and culture, then we'll continue in the world of tyranny.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, let me ask you
up
this.
to
Stay there
us
for a
to
minute.
make up our mind.
Let me ask you this, because you are so enlightened, and I so appreciate you. But I want to know, in the spaces that you travel, in the engagements that you have, do you believe that we even know that we're not awakened? Don't laugh. Don't laugh.
I
I'm
know it's
serious.
not funny. It's
Right.
horrific. It's
Right.
horrific because people will because of the I guess generations and generations of the brainwashing. It's hard to talk to people because they will fight you tooth and nails. Even if you brought the, I beg people, I'd be like, listen to Hidden Colors, listen to Professor Smiles, listen to this, it's not me. This, even though sometimes yourself, the God in you, the God is in you, will tell you something's not right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things being said, but the action says something different. The mouth says one thing, but the action shows a totally different picture.
Yes.
The handwriting is on the wall every day, or how big or how small you really are.
Yes.
And until you get it into your mind what you can be and can do, you have to stop allowing like I said, the 9% that controls the world is controlling you. Through media, through the psychological warfare, through the chemical warfare, and all the other injustices that they use and they plant in your way. There's so many monkey wrenches that's keeping our people blinded and walking dead. I mean, when will we wake up and understand it's on us?
Yeah. Well, you know what? And maybe you bring it to the forefront, and maybe I just need to put it out there for us. And the truth, and I know it's going to be a problem, and I know you're all about to give it to me on this phone, because I know it's coming. But I'm about to say it. Maybe the truth of the matter is they haven't told us what to do yet. So they haven't told
you how to wake up.
Yes, they haven't told us how to wake up. So because we value so much of what they say, we don't emulate what they do. We just govern ourselves by what they say.
Yes.
And so because we govern ourselves by what they say, then we won't do any better for us until they tell us, oh, you all should be. And here's prime example. Donald Trump, President Trump, was talking bad mouth in Baltimore. Right? Bad mouthing. How can you all live in this rat infested, garbage torn city? No one would want to live there and the like. Okay. So because he said now it was nasty and carried on, then now everybody else wants to come in and start trying to clean up because he said it.
Exactly.
But we've been so conditioned in that space that we should live in trash, we should live in filth, we should live in inadequate service, we should live in deplorable housing, we should live in blight, we should live in inadequate education, we should live in less than, we should live in not having grocery stores, we should live in, can I keep going? Should I keep going? So they've conditioned us, they've conditioned us to believe that that is all that we are worth, and that's all, and that's what we should expect to have. And it's better than when you were on the slave plantation. So you should be happy right now. And if you haven't amassed more, it's because you haven't pulled yourself up by the bootstraps. But how can you pull yourself up by the bootstraps when the bootstraps that you're pulling up are given to you? You bought the boots from the oppressor. So how are you going to be able to pull up the boots?
Continuing to live in your oppressor's land.
Right. The boots aren't going to ever fit you right. They're not ever going to fit you the way that they fit them because you keep trying to do it their way.
Exactly.
That's all I'm saying. You keep trying to do it their way, and where does that lead us? And how many years we got to sit up and wait for somebody else to tell us how great we were?
Exactly.
How great we are, how we built up everything, how we've done all this stuff, but we're so afraid to live in that.
So afraid to exercise their greatness.
So maybe Mussolini wasn't wrong. And the truth of the matter is, we live in a dictatorship now. Y'all don't like this,
That's right.
We live in a dictatorship that's masked as a democracy.
That's right.
I like that, everybody.
Yep,
Newsflash.
We're living in concentration camps, but we just can't see the fence all around us.
Come on. And you make a point. Get this. We live physically and mentally in concentration camps.
That's right.
So they don't ever have to. Remember, back on the plantation, they didn't have boundaries. There were no fences. There was no, people weren't on tethers. There weren't any brick walls, borders. It wasn't any of that. It was open, free land, but you had the fear of God in you that if you left, they was going to kill you, kill your kids, kill everybody. They bred that in you, so you just stayed captive. So how many of us physically stay captive in our spaces of deplorable conditions, still having our hand out to the same person that oppressed you, but it's masked itself in a different space? And then in our minds, even if you didn't remove yourself from that physical space, your mental space has held you captive.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's it in a nutshell. Thank you for always trying to awaken the sleeping giants.
I don't know what else to do.
I know it.
I guess that's why I just ask us, like, when I pray for these types of conversations and I get this type of information, I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to give this conversation, and I know if it offends people and I understand if it does, but what else do we do? What else? I'm telling you all, I was in Baltimore. If you could take those Baltimore conditions and the people and put them here, they think that they were at Club Med. No, I mean, like, you think, see, the difference here is that we'll say, oh, we'll go and there'll be blocks with no homes, right? It'll just be land. Mm-hmm. There, imagine you just have blocks of buildings that are there, that are all dilapidated. It looks like a bomb just hit. So you have blocks and blocks of buildings that are all uninhabited. Some are boarded, some are clapped in, whatever. And there's no plan for development, no thoughts of development. It's a nomadic space, and everyone has been accustomed to the trauma. Let me just say that. Mm-hmm. And they know it, but what else do they do? Where else do they go? This is all that they know. And then they look at the rhetoric of the same politicians who are coming in saying, oh, I'm going to fix this for you if you vote for me, if you're going to do this. We do the same thing here. We do it in every urban and inner and rural area across this country. We do the same thing. We sit and hope that this time they're going to save us based on what they say.
You're waiting for the devils to put out the fires. I mean, and you continually run to these demons and ask them, please, baby, please. And all they do is keep you on your knees. And the 9% continue to dominate the world, and your thoughts and your moves from the womb to the tomb, they've already predicted your doom. But once again, if you don't get busy fighting for freedom, you will continue to suffer from tyranny. Yeah. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you so much for calling. And so maybe to her point, the freedom that we're fighting for is the freedom of mind, like of the thought. Like, are you free? Like, just, and I know it might be radical, right? I get that, because it might go against everything that you were taught. Okay, I understand that. But just if you had, what does it say? The faith, the grain of a mustard seed? Just that one little inclination to say, maybe it's something else. Maybe I can be free by doing something else. Maybe I can look at this for what it is, figure out how to make it work for me. And then working for me means it works for us, because we share the information and we're not afraid. We don't live in fear. I want us to go to what W.E.B. Du Bois, let me just say. There was a piece, amazing piece in the Washington Post, and it's Fight for American Democracy. And the subtitle is, with democracy in peril, Du Bois reminds us of the long fight to protect it. Now, if you all didn't know that he was probably one of the most accomplished African Americans in history. If you think about the era in which he grew up in and his experiences and what he was able to accomplish, let me share a couple of those things with you. He was the first African American to receive a Harvard doctorate. He authored 16 non-fictional works on the Black experience, 5 novels, 2 autobiographies, and countless articles and essays. His 1903 genre-defying book, The Souls of Black Folk, is considered an American classic. He co-founded the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People and shaped the course of the modern civil rights movement as editor of its journal, The Crisis. Scholar, activist, artist, and much more, he remains a singular figure in American history. And arguably, the author of this work states that the central thread of his life and work was the engagement with the potential of American democracy and the presence of the color line, which he prophesied in 1900 would be, quote, the problem of the 20th century. He was Black and proudly so, but he was also an American and understood that the unique gifts of Black folk sprung from their tortured experience in the United States. And the article goes on to talk about what those historical experiences have been and his shaping of imploring Black folk to fight for their right to be able to get something under this America that they created as identified as democracy. But there's a clip I want to share with you. Democratic Now, I believe, Democracy Now! Is the source of the clip. It's only a few minutes. Du Bois believed Black workers must lead the struggle for democracy. And in this clip, you'll see Anthony Monteiro on the 145th anniversary of the birth of Du Bois, and he looks at Du Bois' new views on racism, capitalism, and the role of Black workers. And I believe that finds us right where we are right now. It's the same space, specifically for where we are in Detroit. We are the working class. We have sustained and maintained this community, this city. There's still the tale of 2 cities. And we honor the legacy of our own Coleman Alexander Young, Honorable Mayor Coleman Alexander Young, and his premise to be able to develop a thriving downtown and also neighborhoods. But it seems something happened along the way. Wasn't there a song? And once you get to the boulevard, that 7.2 miles kind of stops off. And the downtown is thriving. It's a whole new world. And don't believe that we're alone, because it's the same thing in Baltimore. It's the same thing in all these urban enclaves in which they've created all these stadiums and all this nightlife and all this development and all these things to attract tourists and opportunities and monies and to create this space. But something happened along the way. And maybe truly understanding democracy, of the role that we play in the ideology of democracy, will cause us to do something different when we literally go and vote. Let's take a look at the conversation, and then we'll come back to talk more about it.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. On February 23rd, it will be the 145th anniversary of the birth of W.E.B. Du Bois. He's been known as the father of the American Civil Rights Movement, the founder of Pan-Africanism, and a figure of both controversy and one of great, you could say, adulation. Now joining us to talk about the life of Du Bois and what he means to us today is Anthony Monteiro. He's a professor of African American Studies at Temple University in Philadelphia. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
So why, of many leaders in African American history, there's only a real few that have kind of lasted the century and still remained, it seems, so relevant to today. Why is that true of Du Bois?
I think that's so because he contributed on multiple levels to African American struggles and to the transformation of America. He was this great scholar, the first person to get a PhD from Harvard, and he writes his dissertation on the transatlantic slave trade, and then he writes probably the first scientific work of urban sociology, the Philadelphia Negro, and then he goes on to found what is in the 20th century the first civil rights organization, the Niagara Movement. It is this tremendous intellectual and scholarly production that puts him on the map. But then on top of it, he is this unbelievable activist. everything from civil rights to Pan-Africanism to labor rights, and ultimately anti-imperialism and socialism. So he lives 95 years, and he's productive for a good part of that time, and he's left a tremendous legacy and made a tremendous impact.
Let me first of all tell viewers, we're going to sometime in the next couple of months really work our way through the history of Du Bois and go through all the big beats of his life. Right now we're just going to focus on a few things in a couple of segments leading up to the anniversary of his birth. So talk about his split with Booker T. Washington and what that was about.
Yeah, that's an important split at the beginning of the 20th century. He really crystallizes it in one of the chapters in his famous book, The Souls of Black Folk. And he differed with Booker Washington on the issue of education, higher education in particular, whether or not the black college elite should be given a liberal education equal to that white elites were getting in the top white universities. But he also differed on the question of whether or not black folk should sacrifice civil rights and voting rights for the promise of support from Northern capital for economic and vocational training in the South.
Yeah, talk a bit about what this was actually codified in something called the Atlanta Compromise, right?
Oh, yeah, the Atlanta Compromise speech, and Du Bois named it that. And it was this grand compromise that Booker T. Washington conceived. He said, look, the nation is not willing to grant us voting rights and civil rights, that is the North and South. We're not prepared to live up to the promise of Reconstruction. So he said, look, let's forget that. The nation needed black labor in the past, and as it industrializes, it will need black labor in the future. And what we must do, and what black leadership must do, is to prepare black people for the coming industrialization and the need for labor that the future held. Du Bois believed, however, that the bargain cost black people too much, that we could not give up civil and political rights, that even if conceivably economic benefit would come from it, we could not defend those economic benefits unless we had the vote, unless we were full citizens, unless we had civil rights.
The Atlanta Compromise had actually accepted segregation as a legitimate thing. That was part of the deal, wasn't it?
And Booker Washington anticipated by about a year the Plessy v. Ferguson decision by the Supreme Court, which legalized and said it was constitutional to separate the races under the fiction of separate and equal. What it actually did, and I think Du Bois anticipated this, was to protect white privilege.
So Du Bois becomes a very public figure, if I understand it correctly, by the early 20th century. He's amongst a couple of the most well-known African Americans. And he, in fact, I guess next to Booker T. Washington, who he opposes. And is this, in many ways, the roots of the civil rights movement, then?
Oh, yes, it is. Because the path of Booker T. Washington was the path of denying or repudiating the struggle for civil rights, at least for the foreseeable future. The path that Du Bois and his followers adopt is the path of the fight for civil rights. So if, let us say, black folk had chosen in the 20th century, as we went forward, the path of Booker T. Washington, conceivably we would have never had a civil rights movement.
And do you see a reflection of Booker T. Washington type of interest and ideology today? Is there a reflection of that?
Oh, yes. I think among sections of the black middle class and petty bourgeoisie, there are strong resonances of Booker Washington. I argue that the race policies, if you want to call them that, of the Obama administration have more in common with Booker T. Washington's conceptualization of things than they do with either Du Bois or Martin Luther King or the civil rights movement of the 60s.
What's an example of that?
You take his State of the Union speech, where he talks about opportunity if you work hard. You take the example, which parallels this, of counseling black folk, that what you need to do is clean up your cultural act, clean up your behavior, and then you will have greater opportunity for fitting in to the middle class and the opportunities that are afforded to it.
We'll work to strengthen families by removing the financial deterrence to marriage for low-income couples, and do more to encourage fatherhood. Because what makes you a man isn't the ability to conceive a child, it's having the courage to raise one.
This is neo Booker T. Washingtonism, and what it does is the opposite of what Du Bois was doing in the Niagara movement, which was to question the color line and to point to the color line and racial disparity and racial inequality as the source of the problems that black people face. The Washingtonites and the Obamaites argue that the problems are not generated externally, but are rooted in the black community itself.
Yeah, you saw that within that back and forth with Reverend Wright, then candidate Obama, I guess it was, more or less talked about being in a post-racial society, that somehow Reverend Wright was stuck in the past.
That's right. That's right. And that's the great Philadelphia speech that he gives in 2008 on race, which a lot of liberals and even progressives celebrated. But what it was a Booker T. Washington type of speech.
Well, this is just the beginning of a discussion about the life of Du Bois. So please join us for the next part of this interview with Anthony Montero on the Real News Network.
That was an amazing clip, so appreciative of Democracy Now! I hope that you got the gist of it. And I want to conclude with some couple paragraphs from the work that Chad Williams did in the Washington Post. He states, Donald Trump and what he has wrought are symptomatic of a deeper cancer of white supremacy that has been present in America since its founding. From the perspective of black folk, as Du Bois, as opposed to Du Bois, brilliantly and consistently demonstrated, democracy has always been in a state of crisis. Trump is both the mirror and our historic reckoning. As each day seemingly marks a continued erosion of our democracy, it is easy to be disillusioned. Du Bois died disillusioned, exiled from the land of his birth and treated as a political pariah. However, he continued to believe not in systems and parties, but in people. And he always maintained his faith in black people to live, love, and fight to make the democratic ideal of America a reality, a faith that inspires from the grave. And so that's what I share with us today. The same faith in the fight and the idea in us, that no matter what we are confronted with, our conversations aren't to make us disillusioned, but to create a reality and a beacon of light and an awakening that where we are right now, the truths of understanding that space, then that truth allows you to create an action plan to make it better for you, to make these moments matter, to make this life matter, not the whole adage that you have to die and go on to have this freedom. That you are Americans. We are Americans. And this is still the greatest nation to live in. And so the takeaway is that America wasn't a democracy until black Americans made it one. We are amazing. Your moments matter. The existence of who we are has created what we live in today. And what we do today will determine what our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren do and live in and are able to experience in this America long after we're gone. So I pray that you have been educated, enlightened, empowered, that something takeaway that has you to go, and to share something with someone, and to be able to understand your purpose and your power. Don't give it away, everyone. You are uniquely you, defined and destined to walk in the steps to unleash your greatness. But it's an awakening that has to happen. And I pray that you are awakened. And the truth of the matter is, I'll do everything that I can to ensure that you are. So our time is up. Make the moments matter again. Make your day amazing. I look forward to seeing you bright and early tomorrow morning. We do have Eddie Treadwell in the building. He gifted me something amazing. I'm going to share that with you all on tomorrow. We're going to have more conversation. So I look forward to seeing you then, bright and early, 7 a.m.
you.